Megyn Kelly had a very fascinating discussion on her program on Friday. She had as her second guest a man by the name of Dr. Frank Turek, who was there when Charlie Kirk was assassinated and gave a lot of the background information. But she had a question that was specifically Catholic. Now, Dr. Frank Turek, I believe, is a pastor, evangelical pastor, so he was excellent in the way he answered the question, but since it was really a Catholic question, I don't think he was able to answer it in the way, obviously, a Catholic would. And this isn't to say anything bad about Dr. Frank Turek. He did an excellent job. But like I said, it was a Catholic question. The question that Megyn Kelly had was that Charlie Kirk was wearing a cross and a St. Michael's medal. And her question was, how is it that Charlie Kirk got shot if he was wearing a St. Michael's medal? Let me bring up that particular question, and then we'll answer the question from there.
I don't understand this. I saw the necklace. Mm-hmm. Erica's wearing it. Mm-hmm. And it had a cross on it, and it had a St. Michael's medal. Mm-hmm. St. Michael. Mm-hmm. I mean, St. Michael, he's the one who's supposed to protect us in battle, defend us against the wickedness and snares of the devil. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't get it. And I don't know why I'm putting it all on St. Michael as opposed to Jesus. And, he was wearing a cross. He was wearing a St. Michael medal. I just feel like if I went out in front of a crowd wearing a cross and a St. Michael's medal, I would feel next to invincible. And not only was he shot and killed, he was shot and killed around the neck, just exactly where the necklace was. I know what you said about, God sacrificed his own son, but I just feel like this doesn't make sense to me. I'm angry. I'm mad at God.
And let me say before we go any further, that was an excerpt that came from her program on Friday. The name of the program is Jimmy Kimmel and Sore Cultural Losers and Charlie Kirk's Spiritual Revival with Steve Bannon and Frank Turek. It was approximately 1 hour and 31 minutes into the program, and I did try to find a way to contact the Megyn Kelly Show to ask permission, and I found absolutely no way to do that. And I take that as being fair use, and please, Megyn Kelly or any of your producers, if you have a problem with me having this excerpt in the program, please contact me immediately through CatholicAudiomedia.com. So one of the things that she had a legitimate question. How is it that Charlie Kirk died if he was wearing a St. Michael's medal? Now, in order to understand this, we have to understand what that all means. First of all, he had what is known as a medal. The word is spelled M-E-D-A-L, and it was a medal of St. Michael. It's commonly a reminder that St. Michael, first of all, is an archangel. You will find him in the book of Daniel. So St. Michael is not what we can traditionally consider a saint in the Catholic Church, because he was never human. He is an archangel. And there's something fascinating that has to deal with all of that in light of this. Well, St. Michael is often seen as the protector of police and people who are protectors of safety. So you can call them first responders. The other thing is she's saying, but how did Charlie Kirk get shot if he was wearing the St. Michael medal? Well, let's find out what the connection is with that. First of all, we have to go back maybe about 140 years. We have to go to Pope Leo XIII. Pope Leo XIII is the one after whom Pope Leo XIV took his name. Very powerful pope. He was in power for a long time, had a lot of things to share. He was the one who created the encyclical Rerum Novarum that basically determined the church's social doctrine teaching, including her support of unions. So that was Pope Leo XIII. Well, as the story goes, and there are several versions of the story, but basically was that Pope Leo XIII had a vision or a dream of an experience very similar to the book of Job, where where actually Satan encounters God, and God gives Satan 100 years, and then after those 100 years of over, that basically the reign of Satan forever is over, and the second coming of Christ comes. So, however, apparently in this vision or dream, he saw some really horrible things. Now, you got to remember, he reigned at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century. I do believe he was the very first pope to be on film. So you're talking about the time frame around there. So what happens is he sits down and he writes this prayer. The prayer is actually longer than the more commonly used part that's prayed, and you heard it during her excerpt. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our strength against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Now, what Megyn Kelly is saying is, this is St. Michael. How is it that he didn't protect Charlie Kirk? There's another part there. She says, I know that we realize that God offered up his own son. Well, now we have to get another part of this story, and that is the story behind the crucifixion. Now, we know, and if you listen to the entire program, you will hear Dr. Frank Turek talk about why Jesus died on the cross. But there's another story we want to look at in light of that. And this comes from the 7th century by Saint Maximus the Confessor. You see, I can answer for you the question of why did Jesus die on the cross? He died that we may be saved. But that's actually the reason why he died. Why did he die on a cross 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday? There actually is no specific teaching that answers that question, but St. Maximus the Confessor actually gave us a possible answer to that question. With that, we want to understand that Jesus had to live the law perfectly. That was his role, so he had to live the law perfectly. And in doing so, he had to be born. That's why he was incarnated. He had to live his human life, and he had to die. He could have died of old age, and we would have been saved, because what he had to do was live the law perfectly. So what was the crucifixion about? And St. Maximus the Confessor said that what you're actually witnessing in the crucifixion is the devil doing everything he can to get Jesus not to love for so much as one, and this is my word, obviously, millisecond. Here's the reality. What Jesus had to do was live the law perfectly. And what is the law? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's what he had to do. So in understanding that, he had to do those two things. And we see that he lived his whole life loving perfectly. Now, I'm going to give you two examples where that becomes very intense. One, when he clearly did not want to go through the crucifixion. He was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he obeys the Father. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then not only is he crucified, but remember, on the way to be crucified, when he's being nailed to the cross, he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And there you go again. Love your neighbor as yourself. So he clearly lived the law perfectly, but this was the devil doing everything he could to ensure that Jesus would not love for so much as a nanosecond. He didn't even have to hate. He just had to not love. And this is what you're actually seeing in the crucifixion. Now, so what you have to understand is what you're witnessing in the crucifixion is a spiritual battle. Later, St. Paul talks about this, that we are actually in a spiritual battle. And when we're talking with the idea of St. Michael the Archangel, where is his fight? It's really a spiritual fight. Now, we have to understand that St. Michael could have prevented Charlie from being shot. But we have to understand, and I talked to another priest about this today, and he pointed out, but don't forget, we believe in free will, total free will. And so what you have is the man who, his alleged shooter, he had the free will to attempt to shoot Charlie Kirk. So the reality is that he had the attempt to shoot Charlie Kirk out of his free will, and even though technically St. Michael the Archangel could have done this, he could have diverted the bullet, and John Paul II claims that that's what happened, and he was not shot. He was not killed when he was shot, and he believed that it was Mary, the Mother of God, who protected him, and that is believed to come from a prediction that was made to the children of Fatima, the third secret. So we see a lot of those connections, and trust me, they all connect. So that's the reality. The man had free will to shoot him. He allegedly shot him, and St. Michael the Archangel, protected Charlie on a spiritual level, but not necessarily on a physical level. Well, not on a physical level at all. But the bottom line is the spiritual level takes the priority, because what are we all about ultimately is salvation. Now, I personally believe that because of this, you're going to see a lot of spiritual, and you are seeing a lot of spiritual effects that are happening. And you're seeing a powerful thing. Now, what do we see with spiritual effects? Well, let us remember the powerful reality. We can see this in the Gospel of John, especially the first chapter. What does Christ do? The light shines into the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it. So you're seeing a lot of darkness being exposed right now. The light shines into the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. Now, there's another part of this whole thing that I think was important to bring up, and that is, this is a unique time that all this happened, and we are living in a unique time right now. You see, from August 15th to September 29th is what is known as the 40 days of St. Michael. You see, this is a special time that in other countries, they don't necessarily celebrate it here in the United States, but in other countries, they celebrate the 40 days of St. Michael, which Brazil happens to be one of them. That's where I first learned about this. And again, it comes from the Assumption of Mary, which is August 15th, to the Feast of the Archangels, which is September 29th. So again, not only was he wearing the St. Michael medal, but it happened during what is known in Portuguese by the Brazilians, the Quaresma do São Miguel. So the 40 days of St. Michael. So and that brings up just another interesting little dynamic there, that all of that is happening in this time. So keeping that in mind, and now we look at that reality of what that all is happening around us, and keeping in mind that simple, important verse from the Gospel of John: the light shines into the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. So that's one of the powerful things that you are seeing here. Can I answer the question of why Charlie was shot and St. Michael the Archangel did not protect him from the effects of that bullet? Well, technically, no. But I do believe that the protection he had was a spiritual protection, because we are in a spiritual battle. If you look at Ephesians 6:10, this is something that is defined right then and there. We are in a spiritual battle. 6:10 and following, where St. Paul that talks about this is what we do. And how do we fight this battle? We don't attack, we fight with spiritual armor. That's what we do. So check that out, Ephesians 6:10. So we fight with spiritual armor, and that spiritual armor is that which leads us to salvation despite the attacks of the demonic. Very important points we're seeing here. finally, as we look at this, we see this powerful reality. We see all this that's happening. And we have to understand, first of all, many people there are people who are saying how wonderful Charlie Kirk was, and there are people who are saying how awful Charlie Kirk was. Charlie Kirk was a human being, and both sides would be part of anyone being a human being. But clearly, he is someone, as I said earlier, he thought outside the box. And clearly, whatever it is he did, it clearly had an effect in a very powerful way. I would contend that the St. Michael's medal protected him on a spiritual level, but also will be a light, will be the sign, in a sense, because of St. Michael, and Christ, who obviously is